morning, folks. This is Ron Ray, your host of To Your Health and Wealth radio program here on KGNB. And this is the program where we talk about everything related to your health and wealth in retirement. I own a company called Turning 65 Solutions Tax and Insurance here in New Braunfels, and we are a full-service retirement planning firm, and most of our business has to do with Medicare. We help you get into Medicare, learn all about it, sign up, get your Medicare Advantage plan, Medicare supplement, whatever you need, and that's what we do. But we have a lot of friends around town that we like to highlight here on the show, and our guest this morning is Dustin Mundorf. He is the principal and owner of Mundorf Wealth Management here in town, and he's going to tell us all about what he does. So welcome, Dustin. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
Yeah, so you and I have known each other for a few years now, and kind of hit it off, and like what you do, and
Likewise.
So just wanted to give you a chance to speak to our listeners and tell us about what you do. So tell us about yourself and tell us what you do.
Sure. So I've got a wealth management practice here in New Braunfels. Strong focus on retirement income planning. So we do some financial planning to help people figure out how they're going to make that transition most of the time from earning a paycheck to making their own paycheck with the savings and investments they've hopefully set aside. And, also provide fiduciary investment advice, especially for those folks that are tired of doing that themselves or they don't want to do it themselves. They want some help ensuring that their portfolio is going to be aligned with that plan. And then, there are only two things we can do with our money, right? We can spend it or we can give it away. We can give it away, while we're alive, or we can give it away after we're gone. So estate planning is important as well. Partner with some estate planning attorneys to provide estate planning and trust planning as well.
Right. Yeah. I always talk to clients about what their plans are for their money besides just living on it in retirement and providing income. But, if there's any left over, what are your plans for it? And sometimes they don't really have an answer. So I'll just suggest, why don't you just spend it?
Right.
It's your money, spend it.
Right.
And, I have a friend that always used to say, I thought it was a pretty funny joke, and I stole it for myself, say, you'll never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul.
Right.
You know why? Because your kids will always unhook the U-Haul.
That's good.
And so the goal is to spend all that money and write your last check to the undertaker, and it might bounce.
Right.
So, all right. Well, you are a retirement income specialist. You have a designation for that, don't you?
Sure. Yeah. RICP. Yeah.
Yeah. And tell me about that.
So Retirement Certified Income Professional, it's just a designation from the American College for, typically for advisors that specialize in that retirement income planning stage. And, we can think about, retirement planning. A lot of people are familiar with that what we would call the accumulation phase, right? Where they're working and they're building those assets. And that's usually for the most part, pretty simple and straightforward. Even if you don't maybe pick the perfect investments, when you're funding an account and your employer's kicking in money, oftentimes it's not a big deal if there's a lot of volatility or those share prices, fall because you're feeding that account and your employer is. So over time, often that works out pretty well. It can tend to get more complicated, and the dynamics change quite a bit when you're not purchasing those investments, but you're selling them to try to live off of them. Mm-hmm. Everything changes.
Right. So is it fair to say you probably don't work with a lot of younger people who are starting out saving, still working, saving money?
No. I mean, those people need advice, and I'm especially family of my clients. I'm happy to refer them to some resources, but they typically don't need what I do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the majority of our clients too. They've already, of course, hence the name Turning 65 Solutions. They've gotten to that point where, for the most part, they've already worked and made all the money they're ever going to make and saved it, and now we've got their savings, and we've got to make that last.
Right.
And that's where you come in.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So as a retirement income planner, what all are you looking at? It's not just the money. It's not just the savings. What goes into a plan?
No, absolutely not. So, overall, what we're looking at is how sustainable is the plan. In other words, is the money going to last? Is the plan going to be relatively predictable and relatively reliable? So we're looking at, hey, can you provide the income that you need to meet your current spending needs? Can you do that adjusted for inflation? Can you do that after paying taxes? And if you can't, then we either need to adjust that plan or we need to adjust your spending until it's going to be sustainable, which means, last hopefully into your 90s, should you live that long, with some cushion, because I like to talk about perfect financial plans. And what I mean by a perfect financial plan is, somebody goes online and they look at a calculator, and in that plan, the money lasts just until, they're 95 or 100, and, the money just runs out at that point. So there's not a lot extra left over. There's no cushion in that plan. So it's a perfect plan as long as one spouse doesn't predecease the other spouse, and you go from 2 Social Security benefits down to 1, or you lose pension income. Or as long as somebody doesn't have heavy medical spending or a chronic illness or a long-term care event, right? Mm-hmm. So those are reasons why we would not only want to make sure that plan, that basic plan, is sustainable, but we want to test it and make sure it's sustainable if we have a premature death or something like a long-term care event. Mm-hmm. And then we want to, on the back end of that plan, we want to make sure that we're prepared for an efficient transfer of an estate. And then, of course, we start by asking our clients, the folks that we're working with, what their concerns are, what they're worried about, and that's what we build the plan around.
Okay. And that process, how long does that take? You can't just sit down in one session with some folks and come up with a plan, right? There's a process to it, and it takes a little bit of time and effort and back and forth with the clients, right?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, and you've probably had this experience, the first time somebody comes into my office or the first time we do a call, they might want some answers from me. And unfortunately, most of the time the answer is going to be maybe, or I don't know, until we get some more information. And that's part of a fiduciary responsibility, is making sure that you understand somebody's current position and what it is they're trying to accomplish before you offer them advice. So it's a process, right?
I always like to say there's no cookie cutters in my office. Everybody gets a very individualized, very specific recommendation, because everybody has a different situation.
Sure. And
we need to know what the situation is and what your expectations of your situation in the future, even though some of that is very unpredictable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned long-term care event, and we've been talking about long-term care a bit on the show lately, mostly with providers. But we've a lot of that conversation has to do with the need, right? How many people are going to need long-term care? Which current stats say somewhere around 70 to 75% of everybody turning 65 today is going to need some level of long-term care in the future. What the long-term care providers that we talk to haven't been talking about, because I haven't asked them. I want to talk about their services that they provide. What they do for folks is the fact that care is very expensive.
Sure.
And, if we're looking at a retirement plan, we can, between, somebody that does what you do and somebody that does what we do with the health insurance, we can feel pretty confident about expenses, right? Except for long-term care. That's something that we don't know. We don't have any control over the cost.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's, people recognize that can be a catastrophic expense and something that they know that they should plan for. But sometimes, the cost of something like traditional long-term care, or even qualifying sometimes for traditional long-term care. So a lot of times I hear from people, we know it's a problem. It's a problem in our eyes that's so big that we don't think we can address it.
Right. I hear the same thing. They just got the sticker shock when they got a quote for the long-term care insurance when they were 50 at their job, and the group benefits agent came in and gave them a quote, and they just decided it wasn't a good idea. But that get that bill from that skilled nursing facility for $80,000 a year. That's got a little shock that goes along with it too.
Yeah, and the main thing, and I know you discuss this with folks too, that the main thing that I tell people is, if you've looked at traditional long-term care, understand there are some other creative approaches to get at least some protection in place for that risk, and oftentimes there are ways to do that. Sometimes in a more cost-effective way, or many times a way that might be easier to qualify for than traditional long-term care. So that's not the only way to approach the problem.
Right. Good. So in the last 60 seconds, just tell us, who's your ideal client? Who do you mesh with well?
Sure. So first of all, friendly folks. That's kind of my first requirement, that somebody's friendly, and that they actually need my help. And and the people that I'm going to tend to serve best are those people in what we would call the retirement red zone. First 5 years prior to retirement, 5 years into retirement, somebody that's trying to transition from living off of that paycheck to creating their own paycheck in a predictable, reliable way, and managing a lot of the risk as they move into that retirement stage and try to create their own income. And just somebody who's looking for advice, because that's what I do. It's what I'm compensated for. Somebody who doesn't necessarily want to do all that planning and the management of all their investments themselves to make that plan work. Somebody who wants to lean on a professional to provide some value and advice and guide them down that path.
Great. Well, I think we've got a few of those for you listening. So that wraps it up for the first segment of To Your Health and Wealth. We'll be back right after this break. Well, welcome back, folks. This is Ron Ray, your host for To Your Health and Wealth here on KGNB. And we've been having a conversation with Dustin Mundorf. He's the principal and owner of Mundorf Wealth Management here in New Braunfels. He's a retirement planning specialist, and we were just talking about what he does and who he works with, and I had an idea about how you find people or how people find you, but I think you've got something that's a little bit unique, a little bit different than what a lot of advisors might do, is some kind of digital marketing or steak dinner seminars. But
Right.
you do something a little bit different. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we've been doing some more kind of academically oriented, actual classes. And, when we do these classes, we usually break it up into 2 nights, spend a couple of hours each night. So, as opposed to what a lot of advisors, have done in the past, we're spending a lot more time with folks so we can slow down and really take a deeper dive into, a lot of these people's concerns. So, the classes that we've been doing, we'll talk about Social Security, and a lot of people are probably familiar with, claiming strategies. We'll talk about that a little bit, but we go beyond that, and we talk about the taxation around Social Security and what actually affects that taxation. So a lot of people have heard maybe some of their Social Security will be taxed, maybe some of it won't, but most people don't really understand, why Social Security might be taxed or what the mechanism is behind that. So, we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about tax moves, and that's a really big subject right now, because we're looking at about 21 months. We got about a 21-month window, this kind of sweet spot. Right now, our tax rates are historically low in this country. If you do the math, they moved tax rates just a couple of points in each bracket, but they expanded the brackets in a way that, most, for example, married couples right now on the same amount of income are paying anywhere from 25 to 50% less in taxes than they would have paid on the same amount of income in 2017. And absent new legislation, we know that those tax rates sunset at the end of 2025. So we've been talking about some tax moves. I don't know, for the people that attend my classes or the people that are listening right now, tax moves like Roth conversions or other moves we might do to take taxable accounts like brokerage accounts or bank accounts and convert them into tax-free savings. I don't know if those moves are right for any one person without getting to know them. But what I do know is that right now is the time to be considering those things. You got a really short window. So we'll talk about that. We take a deep dive in those classes on estate planning. I found that that's a big blind spot for people when they're doing their retirement planning. A lot of people really don't have any plan as to, how those assets might transfer, or more importantly, they don't know that the risk that they're exposed to if one spouse or the other becomes incapacitated. One of the big questions I'll ask in these classes is, hey, you become incapacitated, who has access to your IRA? Who has access to, your life insurance policy? Who has access to your 401k? And oftentimes we'll say, well, my beneficiary does. Well, they do once you're below ground.
Yeah.
But as long as you're above ground, if you become incapacitated, the answer is no one, absent some proper estate planning, no one has access to those assets until you go get a guardianship. And that can be a very costly, lengthy process. So we'll teach people how to avoid that with just putting some basic estate planning documents in place. And then, in those classes, we'll also talk about some ways to take volatility. We'll talk about the importance of taking volatility out of your investment accounts as you approach retirement to the degree needed so that you can make your investment returns and your retirement income a little bit more predictable and reliable, relatively speaking. So we'll talk about why that's important. We'll talk about how the math changes that actually makes that important. And we'll talk about some ways to consider doing that.
It's actually a 2-night class, isn't it? Yeah.
Right.
So it was at 2 hours, 4 hours a night?
The classes we've been doing actually about an hour and 30, about an hour and 40 minutes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So not too long.
Not too long,
you
but
get too much, drinking from a fire hydrant.
Right.
But long enough that you're actually getting some actual, education rather than going to a steakhouse and hearing somebody talk about some scary stuff, but not really truly educating you. 45 minutes before they have to get out before the food comes out, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're providing, workbooks with all the agenda that we're covering so that, people can follow along. It's an actual class. Yeah. It's not a pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think I know you well enough that there's not really a pitch for you because everything is so personalized, right? So you can't pitch a group of people and you don't know what the pitch is going to be for because everybody's going to have a different plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what really makes what you do nice and the way that you offer these services and provide that just to the public. And is there a cost for the class?
No, these classes, there's not any cost for attending.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got one of those classes coming up pretty soon. When is it?
May 7th and May 14th at the Schertz Public Library, starting at 6 p.m. Now, don't just show up if you heard me announce that on this show. If somebody wants to attend, you may see it come across your Facebook feed. If you'd like some information, feel free to send me an email, Dustin, DUSTIN, at longlivemymoney.com.
Longlivemymoney.com. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit jealous of that web address.
That's a fun one, right?
It is, yeah. And that's it's what you do, what we do as insurance agents here, as wealth managers on your side is just to make that money last. So at the end of the class, there may be some other steps. Let's say that they've learned about everything, the topics that you're talking about, and light bulbs have gone off.
Right.
What are those light bulbs? What are the challenges that maybe they already knew they had, but now they understand them a little bit better, or maybe they didn't even know they had when they went to the class? What are the biggest ones you see?
Yeah, so I think the biggest or most consistent challenge I see from folks is, we're all used to, most of us in this country are used to living off of a paycheck for 30 or 40 years. Mm-hmm. And then that stops at some point. And then people are trying to figure out where they're going to get that income from, how they're going to get that paycheck, and the kind of planning you would do around your investments. Honestly, a lot of people, when they've got that paycheck coming and they've got their employer helping them contribute to the 401k, they don't really need a lot of planning many times for that 401k account to grow. Once you start drawing off of that account, it's a whole different dynamic. So understanding how to create a paycheck in addition to Social Security. I've sat down with people with large investment portfolios who took Social Security early or took it as soon as they could. Even though they had a large investment portfolio, they might not have known how to convert those investments to an actual stream of income they can live off of. So that's one of the most consistent challenges I'm seeing from people, is just how to continue their income in a predictable way. Mm-hmm. And then also I see in those classes, I'm getting a lot of questions when people come into my office after those classes, because we'll actually offer folks a lab portion of that class where they can come kind of apply or discuss how what we talked about in class might apply to their situation, answer their individual questions. And I'm getting a lot of questions about estate planning. Like I said, that seems to be a blind spot for a lot of folks that they might not think about. And oftentimes we don't think about that until it's too late. I saw another advisor remark on LinkedIn the other day that, he hasn't talked to too many people that plan to die without a will or an estate plan. People aren't opposed to it. They just never get it done.
Yeah. It's an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, it can be.
I'm the one that has to bring it up a lot. I'm sure you do the same thing. Do you have a will? Do you have an estate plan?
Sure.
No. We haven't got around to that yet.
Yeah.
Why not? You know you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, that it's going to happen. Death and taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, I think that's one of the problems with estate planning, or the way that estate planning is discussed in this country today. Before people die, incapacity can be a bigger problem for people than death. And when you mention estate planning, everybody's thinking about what happens to my assets upon my death. And they might be thinking, like you mentioned earlier, hey, if my plan is to spend everything, they may not care what happens with their assets upon death, even though they should. If there's an easy way to help their kids avoid the headache of probate, they should do that. But the real blind spot for most people is incapacity, and a lot of people might have even done some estate planning. They might have a power of attorney, a durable power of attorney that somebody put in a safe. They gave it to their kids. The kids have it in the safe. And what people oftentimes don't find out until it's too late is that a durable power of attorney is just like a check. It's only good if it's accepted. And what that means is a lot of financial institutions, if you become incapacitated and your kids take that power of attorney down to the bank, or they take it to your investment company, or they take it to your 401k, all these institutions have policies on what they will accept when it comes to that power of attorney. Mm-hmm. So many times they reject those powers of attorney. And if somebody's got dementia, that's the reason the kid's taking them the power of attorney. Guess what? They don't have a capacity to sign a new one. Right. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I'll give in those classes is, if you're not going to protect against incapacity with something like trust planning, if you're going to use a power of attorney, make sure when those powers of attorney are made that they don't go in a safe. Go get them on file with all the financial institutions you do business with right away. Get them accepted. Yeah.
That's good advice. That's good advice, because I've had clients do that exact same thing. Mom's having trouble, need to go, take over the bank accounts, get to the bank and take the paperwork, and the bank says, that's not going to quite cut it.
Yeah, they'll say, well, we want one that's less than 5 years old, or, we need one that's signed in our presence, or, yeah.
So, okay, well, good. That's just all great advice. And, it doesn't cost anything to go to the class. It doesn't cost anything to send you an email and say, hey Dustin, might cost you a couple of pennies, but it doesn't cost a client anything to send you an email at dustin@longlivemymoney.com and say, hey, Dustin, I heard you talking about this on the radio. I got a quick question.
Sure.
Do you answer those kinds of questions for?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, folks can send me an email. If they got a question, they can text me questions at 830-476-2505. Or if somebody wants to book a brief chat to see, I don't know without getting to know somebody if I can help them. But if they want to find out if I can help, they're welcome to reach out on the website to book a free chat at longlivemymoney.com.
Right. And if somebody needs help, but maybe it's outside of the scope of what you do, I'm assuming you have good people that you've vetted that you can refer them to.
Yeah, you're one of them. And, when somebody needs Medicare help, I'm sending them to you, Ron.
And we do appreciate that, and hope that we've done a good job for you.
Certainly.
Well, Dustin, listen, I appreciate you being here. It's been a fun conversation. I've learned a couple of things, and I think our listeners have gotten a couple of things that they can take home too. Well, Dustin, great information. It's been a fun conversation. I learned a couple of things, and I know our listeners are going to appreciate the information and what you do. So I want to thank you for being here. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
Yeah.
Had fun.
Yeah, folks, that's it for To Your Health and Wealth. We're here every Saturday morning on KGNB at 9 o'clock. So we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. And until then, here's To Your Health and Wealth, New Braunfels.